entirely impossible that they should have crossed the English Channel at all. Yet here they were, and in great numbers. We continued up the Tamar several miles, filled our casks, and then landed to cook some of our deer steak, and have the first square meal that had fallen to our lot since the cold water deserted us. But scarce had we built our fire and prepared the meat for cooking, than Snider, whose eyes had been constantly roving about the landscape from the moment that we left the launch, touched me on the arm and pointed to a clump of bushes which grew a couple of 100 yards away. Half concealed behind their screening foliage, I saw the yellow and black of a big tiger, and as I looked, the beast stalked majestically toward us. A moment later he was followed by another and another, and it is needless to state that we beat a hasty retreat to the launch. The country was apparently infested by these huge carnivora, for after 3 other attempts to land and cook our food, we were forced to abandon the idea entirely, as each time we were driven off by hunting tigers. It was also equally impossible to obtain the necessary ingredients for our chemical fuel, and as we had very little left aboard, we determined to step our folding mast and proceed under sail, hoarding our fuel supply for use in emergencies. I may say that it was with no regret that we bid adieu to Tigerland, as we rechristened the ancient Devon, and, beating out into the channel, turned the launch's nose northeast to round Bolt Head and continue up the coast toward the Strait of Dover and the North Sea. I was determined to reach London as soon as possible, that we might obtain fresh clothing, meet with cultured people, and learn from the lips of Englishmen the secrets of the 2 centuries since the East had been divorced from the West. Our first stopping place was the Isle of Wight. We entered the Solent about 10 o'clock one morning, and I must confess that my heart sank as we came close to shore. No lighthouse was visible, though one was plainly indicated upon my map. Upon neither shore was sign of human habitation. We skirted the northern shore of the island in fruitless search of man, and then at last landed upon an eastern point, where Newport should have stood, but where only weeds and great trees and tangled wild wood rioted, and not a single man-made thing was visible to the eye. Before landing, I had the men substitute soft bullets for the steel-jacketed projectiles with which their belts and magazines were filled. Thus equipped, we felt upon more even terms with the tigers. But there was no sign of the tigers, and I decided that they must be confined to the mainland. After eating, we set out in search of fuel, leaving Taylor to guard the launch. For some reason I could not trust Snider alone. I knew that he looked with disapproval upon my plan to visit England, and I did not know but what at his first opportunity he might desert us, taking the launch with him, and attempt to return to Pan America. That he would be fool enough to venture it, I did not doubt. We had gone inland for a mile or more, and were passing through a park-like wood, when we came suddenly upon the first human beings we had seen since we sighted the English coast. There were a score of men in the party, hairy, half-naked men they were, resting in the shade of a great tree. At the first sight of us, they sprang to their feet with wild yells, seizing long spears that had lain beside them as they rested. For a matter of 50 yards they ran from us as rapidly as they could, and then they turned and surveyed us for a moment. Evidently emboldened by the scarcity of our numbers, they commenced to advance upon us, brandishing their spears and shouting horribly. They were short and muscular of build, with long hair and beards tangled and matted with filth. Their heads, however, were shapely, and their eyes, though fierce and warlike, were intelligent. Appreciation of these physical attributes came later, of course, when I had better opportunity to study the men at close range and under circumstances less fraught with danger and excitement. At the moment I saw, and with unmixed wonder, only a score of wild savages charging down upon us, where I had expected to find a community of civilized and enlightened people. Each of us was armed with rifle, revolver, and cutlass. But as we stood shoulder to shoulder, facing the wild men, I was loath to give the command to fire upon them, inflicting death or suffering upon strangers with whom we had no quarrel, and so I attempted to restrain them for the moment, that we might parley with them. To this end I raised my left hand above my head, with the palm toward them, as the most natural gesture indicative of peaceful intentions which occurred to me. At the same time I called aloud to them that we were friends, though from their appearance there was nothing to indicate that they might understand Pan-American or ancient English, which are of course practically identical. At my gesture and words they ceased their shouting, and came to a halt a few paces from us. Then, in deep tones, one who was in advance of the others, and whom I took to be the chief or leader of the party, replied in a tongue which, while intelligible to us, was so distorted from the English language from which it evidently had sprung, that it was with difficulty that we interpreted it. "Who are you?" he asked, "and from what country?" I told him that we were from Pan-America, but he only shook his head and asked where that was. He had never heard of it, or of the Atlantic Ocean, which I told him separated his country from mine. "It has been 200 years," I told him, "since a Pan-American visited England." "England?" he asked. "What is England?" "Why, this is a part of England," I exclaimed. "This is Grubitten," he assured me. "I know nothing about England, and I have lived here all my life." It was not until long after that the derivation of Grubitten occurred to me. Unquestionably, it is a corruption of Great Britain, a name formerly given to the large island comprising England, Scotland, and Wales. Subsequently we heard it pronounced Grabrittin and Grubrittin. I then asked the fellow if he could direct us to Ryde or Newport, but again he shook his head, and said that he never had heard of such countries. And when I asked him if there were any cities in this country, he did not know what I meant, never having heard the word cities. I explained my meanings as best I could, by stating that by city I referred to a place where many people lived together in houses. "Oh!" he exclaimed, "you mean a camp. Yes, there are two great camps here, East Camp and West Camp. We are from East Camp." The use of the word camp to describe a collection of inhabitations naturally suggested war to me, and my next question was as to whether the war was over, and who had been victorious. "No," he replied to this question, "the war is not yet over, but it soon will be, and it will end, as it always does, with the West Enders running away. We, the East Enders, are always victorious." "No," I said, seeing that he referred to the petty tribal wars of his little island. "I mean the Great War, the war with Germany. Is it ended, and who was victorious?" He shook his head impatiently. "I never heard," he said, "of any of these strange countries of which you speak." It seemed incredible, and yet it was true. These people, living at the very seat of the Great War, knew nothing of it, though but 2 centuries had passed since, to our knowledge, it had been running in the height of its titanic frightfulness all about them,